No, Lex Fridman is not a leftist, bro. What do you mean? He's like an Elon simp. Let's hear what he had to say with Richard Wolff about capitalism.
Antithesis to the government. I think an immense con has been pulled on the American people. And the con works like this. You know what's bad and what's dangerous and threatens you? It's the government. The government's going to come in and tell you what to do. The government's going to run your life. The government's the problem. There really is no other way to explain the following in American politics. Large numbers of people lose their homes in a downturn, like the so-called Great Recession of 2008. Who do they blame? The government. Large numbers of people go unemployed. And what are the media all about? The government. If I were a capitalist, I'd love this. I kick the workers by throwing them out of their home, and they don't get angry at me. They get angry at the government. I fire large numbers of people. I have no responsibility for what happens to them as a result of having no job and no income.
This is a really good, like, Richard Wolff, for some of his, like, L takes during COVID, does have a really good way of just arriving at the heart of the agitprop, like the meat and the bones, you know what I mean? Straight up. That minute alone immediately synthesizes the issues with mainstream media and how they play a fundamental role in shifting responsibility away from capitalist corporations back to the government. Now, this doesn't mean that the government does not have a responsibility to fix some of the problems. It, of course, does. But it's a bourgeois government that is 100% operating at the behest of capital owners for their best interests, right? And they don't do that. And that is something that we should be criticizing. But the idea that, like, for example, people say, oh, all the jobs moved overseas to China, the government did that, for example, is such a dumb fucking take. It's like, no, motherfucker, the capitalists did that. Okay? What, you think the government at gunpoint was like, hey, you got to move these factories over to China? No.
And they get angry at the senator. I'm laughing all the way to the bank. This is a genius stroke.
In theory, but if you look at government, because you said accountability, and the capitalist system has no accountability. There's some pushback I give on the accountability. I think there is some accountability we can discuss in a Hegelian way. There's more accountability for. I would say that in theory, government is perfectly accountable. That's the whole point of a democratic system, is you vote people in. In practice, there's a giant growing bureaucracy.
Oh, yeah, he's right.
That is accountable.
No, he's not right.
There's two parties.
Fuck. He said, in theory, the government is supposed to be held accountable through democracy, which is true. He is right about that. Okay? I don't know what is Hegelian about what he's saying. Okay? But I feel like he just threw that word in there because I don't know how that was Hegelian. But anyway, so it is true that in theory that the government is supposed to be held accountable through democracy. That is understandable, but in practice that is not the case. But then he shifts the responsibility of a lack of true democracy occurring in our current democratic process to not like a capitalist bourgeois democratic process, but instead to fucking bureaucracy. Alt-right Ludwig. He's a right-wing Ludwig. Yeah. It is so silly to turn around and just be like, oh, well, actually, the government, there's no real accountability in the government because of bureaucracy and red tape. No.
That seem to be are the same. Media is somehow integrated into making the same two parties that are just wearing different colored shirts to seem like they're very opposed and are arguing and bitterly arguing, calling each other's spouses nasty names and all those kinds of things. Okay, but that's government. So who exactly is worse here? I agree. Government or companies?
Well, why are we asking that question? Well, these are twins. Look, what you were able to say about Republicans and Democrats just now, with which I agree.
Yeah,
I would say the same thing about corporations and the government. This is the same people, literally.
But let's go to Churchill. Which one is the Which one is worse? Let's go to Churchill. Like, democracy is the worst form of government, except all the other ones or whatever. So this kind of same idea. Which one exactly is worse? Because to me, it seems like
which one between what and what?
Government and industry and companies. It's because government is plagued by.
The entire purpose of the government is to put a fucking check on corporations that are operating at the behest of capital, okay? And all of the anger and resentment that everyday Americans feel towards the government, as a matter of fact, stems from the reality that the government is not doing its fundamental job. They're allowing capitalist corporations to run rampant and put profits over the interests of people. That's the issue, okay? But Republicans, reactionaries, conservatives, those who are backed by capital, liberals included, by the way, in the reactionary conversation here, are so good at shifting that responsibility away from corporations, which is what literally Richard Wolff was saying in the beginning, that people like even Lex Fridman, who is, from what I understand, well-read, will repeat that reactionary talking point of, oh, it's the bureaucracy that's like stopping the government from having true accountability. No, man, it is not the bureaucratic process. It is the entire system's design.
I would call it corruption, because the corruption of bureaucratic paperwork, and then because they're not accountable. There doesn't seem to be a serious accountability.
Again, we're not living on the same planet.
Okay.
The greatest practitioners of central planning are corporations.
He's right.
Elon has
Amazon,
an operation,
Walmart,
like General Motors, Ford, IBM, or any of the other megacorps. They have to plan. They buy up companies because they don't want to deal in the market. They don't want the insecurity, the uncertainty of having to buy their inputs or sell their outputs to somebody they don't control. They want the professor to teach the genius of a market. They hate the market. And when they grow to be big, they keep buying whoever they were dealing with before so they could better control them, which requires them then to plan the production and distribution of goods inside rather than buying them in the market. The model of the government is the private corporation. I have spent my life, give you an example, in American universities, big ones, famous ones, not just as a student, but as a professor. I mean, I've been a half a dozen school. I teach now at the new school here. It's another one, right? Mm-hmm. They all model themselves after businesses. They model their... You can attack the bureaucracy of universities, good reason, it's a mess, but they're proudly modeling themselves on organizing their bureaucracy in a business-like manner. So,
isn't the government's job doing dialogue amongst the bourgeoisie and then dominating and compromising with the working class? Yes, that is the job of the government as it stands currently. But in theory, the job of the government, a functional government, one that is actually held accountable by the democratic process, would be one that puts the citizens' interests and even, regulates the marketplace adequately. And this is a capitalist theory that I'm representing, okay? Like, even under a capitalist organization of the economy, what the government is supposed to be doing in theory is to make sure that there is fair market competition, especially in industries that are prone to monopolization, especially in industries that have a natural barrier of entry that is super high, especially in or industries with inelastic demand. Okay? But that's not the case, obviously. Everything that you learn in theory about capitalism is also false. Obviously, there's no perfect information, as Sam H. brought up. There is no supply and demand curve where the market conditions are dealt with by this invisible hand, or dealt with in this invisible manner. It doesn't work that way because there is a lot of regulation, a lot of different components that play a role in it. In changing that, there's an entire multi-billion-dollar propaganda industry in the form of marketing and PR that literally stops you from making adequate market choices as a buyer, okay? So clearly there is no supply and demand and truly informed market decision makers, right? And having said all of that, the government itself does not, the government itself abandons its theoretical responsibility of making sure that, you know, consumers and civilians are not fucked over by said corporations, because they are built, most of these governments are built by capital owners. And their entire process and their entire purpose, the purpose of the government, that is to ensure profit margins stay high for the shareholders, for these corporations.
So you're looking at a difference which isn't there. The government and the private sector are partners, and both of them wouldn't have it any other way. The corporations want that from the government, and the government now knows that to please the corporations is the number one objective they have, because that's how they keep their jobs and keep their system going. And so for all practical purposes, this is the same people.
But there's important differences that I don't know if they're fundamental or just a consequence of history. But if you have government, they're accountable in a different way than companies. Companies are accountable by, especially if you have a consumer, they're accountable by sort of the consumer spending or not spending their money on whatever the heck the company is selling. Right. The government is accountable by votes.
That's not real. That is not real accountability at all. As a matter of fact, that is the opposite of accountability. That's not accountability. If that was the case, there would at the very least be like examples of, I don't know, the fucking Ford Pinto being recalled without any sort of government intervention because people are like, I don't want to buy this because I'm going to die. Okay? Consumers don't make adequate choices. They do not make informed choices. That's the reason why even a fucking ape like Joe Rogan understands why there needs to be like certain restrictions on buildings, right? Certain health code violations that you cannot, that you must abide by, right? Because otherwise, companies that are constantly profit seeking are going to cut corners. They're going to cut corners even when the regulation is there. But they're certainly going to cut corners when there's no regulation whatsoever. And that is going to lead to a lot of people dying.
And it seems like government, unlike companies, for most of companies' history, is always too big to fail, meaning it can always just print money. It can always save itself. And that creates a bureaucracy. You rarely pay the cost of having made bad.
I think his brain is broken fundamentally by capitalism. That like the only way to bring about accountability to the government is through capitalist terms, by allowing the government the default. That's like that's the argument that he's making, like a company would, except the companies don't even fucking default. So I don't know what he's talking about. He's saying that like the government is too big to fail. If you think about it on corporate terms, the government is too big to fail because it can always print its own money and like bail itself out and get out of a shitty situation. And that destroys its accountability, even though he originally said that the government is supposed to be held accountable through democracy, through the democratic process.
Decisions, if you're in government, you distribute the blame, and it's very unclear who's responsible for bad decisions. So bad decisions in government accumulate. So you become more and more and more inefficient, and more.
Dude, you know what's inefficient? Roads. You know what's inefficient? The railway system. You know what's inefficient? The postal service. These are not efficient from a capitalist perspective. And yet, without them, we would not be able to survive. I hate ANCAPs or libertarians or people who don't realize that they are preaching libertarian thought that fucking say stuff like this without recognizing the fundamental role that certain services play in our lives, even if we don't fucking recognize it. Okay? These things are not supposed to be run in an efficient manner. Okay? It's not. It's so stupid. Nobody says the firefighters are inefficient. We should cut their pay. That's insane. It is a service that is absolutely a necessity. Okay? And a lot of those inefficiencies, as Chad is also pointing out, are creating jobs as well. Okay? If we operated on the basis of efficiency, none of the things that I mentioned to you would exist. Okay? They just would not exist.
More poor in your decision making in terms of, you said public transit. Should we build a public transit system in this city or not? That's a difficult decision. That's an interesting decision. I would say it's very often a very good decision.
To cut public transit in a city? What? Oh, should we build public transit system, not cut? He said to build public transit system.
In this city or not. That's a difficult decision. That's an interesting decision. I would say it's very often a very good decision. But whoever makes that decision should be accountable for a good or bad decision. And it seems like companies are more accountable. They feel the pain of having made a bad decision more because they can go bankrupt. There's much more day-to-day pressure to make good engineering decisions.
That's not true. That is just simply not true. And also, again, at the heart of this argument is a premise that Lex Fridman takes for granted because he's a capitalist. And he's talking to a socialist, so I'm sure Richard Wolff is going to pick that apart. Okay? And that underlying premise that he sneaks in and takes for granted is the idea that a government is supposed to operate on an efficient basis, on a basis of efficiency, when in fact, so many of the things, again, like I mentioned, that Lex Fridman takes for granted and doesn't even consider to be inefficient, are inefficient, okay? But they are necessary. A lot of the services that we take for granted that the government handles are inefficient, okay? They are not for profit. That's not how it's supposed to be, okay? So this idea that like governments should run like corporations and you know, the people that make these decisions on public transit, like if they're inefficient, should feel the burden of said decisions, feel the weight of those catastrophic decisions, is a silly one.
Government doesn't seem to be under the same level of pressure. Do you disagree with that?
I disagree with that. Everything in my history pushes me.
I may be living in a different
who knows? You know,
a planet. Who knows? or taking a different sort of drug.
I won't mention the name, but I personally had a lot to do with a very large company here in the United States, here in the New York area. And it involved two brothers and a family who built it up into a huge corporation. One of the brothers was kind of the dynamo of the family, and he was more responsible than anybody else building it up. But he took care of his brothers. He had a nice feeling about his brothers. So the one brother who could not, you know, without help, tie his shoes, became a vice president, got an enormous salary, got a beautiful office in a skyscraper, not that many blocks from where I'm sitting right now. And that was the way that family handled that company. And all of his relatives were somewhere in this company doing a variety of whatever, and my experience with this, and because I went to the schools I told you, all my experiences with that group of people, corporate exec, full of those stories. You know, they made mistake after mistake, which they would tell you about. Didn't undermine they were always able to blame somebody else, something else that scraped them through. And had they not been able to, they would have been replaced by another person who did the same thing for as long as they could. And they knew it. They would talk about it at family events. That's how I know.
Yeah,
I understand that you want the outside world to look at it this way, but it's not my experience.
Interesting.
I think reducing it back to like an individual example of like corporate nepotism, which is rampant, certainly, is not the best way to redirect this conversation. Normally, Richard Wolff does a better job of like undermining his opponent's arguments, but you know, I'll take it. It's not the most effective way to destroy Lex Fridman's argument here, but it's one that a lot of people understand, and it's one that a lot of people recognize. If you've worked any job whatsoever, you see that. You see especially at like corporate levels, especially at like higher levels in corporations, the nepotism that he's speaking of. You know, at like the Young Turks, for example, there was this one guy, straight out of college, hired because he was the nephew of the CEO and owner. Now, you might say, Hasan, that's like a small business, right? Like that's like 26 employees, not that gigantic. How dare you compare that to like the Koch brothers or whatever? But like, that one nephew, he was an idiot, right? He's dumb. He was just not good. And of course, his media career failed immediately after he left the Young Turks. And now no one knows who he is. You would not even recognize him if I told you about this guy. But that's not a story that is a story that's all too common, is what I mean. Regardless of the personal anecdotes that I'm dropping in here. I heard he smells too. No, I heard he smells really good, actually, and he's like super hot. You forgot about that guy? Everybody forgot about that guy. Anyway.
But again, what's that kind of thing, at the risk of saying human nature again, yeah. I wonder what kind of system allows for that more versus less. This is the question of, I would call that, let's put that under the umbrella term.
You were super hot 2 years ago. You're just regular hot now. Dude, weirdest fucking comment. Like, weirdest comment, dude. Absolute weirdest comment. I don't even know why I read shit like that.
Form of corruption.
Okay.
Which system allows for more corruption?
But remember that the way I define the different system is not more or less government.
You sound offended? Is it you? Sounds legit. You sound offended? You fucking got me, dude. You got me.
It's more or less allowing a democratic workplace.
Yeah.
Reconfiguring it. What happened?
Motherfucker looks like the dog shit I stepped on accident. And he's like, dude, you're not even fucking super hot anymore. You're just like regular hot, bro. Fucking, yeah.
Happens when everybody has a vote. When you have to explain what the strategies are, what the alternatives are to a larger number of people than a board of directors or major shareholders or whoever it is that most companies are responsible to. And now you've got a whole different universe. It's not a small group of people, can't be hidden the way it's normally hidden, most of it, and on and on and on. This is, worker co-ops is what this is called in many parts of the world. So it's not that I'm advocating something that's never been seen before, not at all. The Marxism I understand is to pick from historical precedents the things that we think.
So here's the thing. Here's the thing that people don't understand. Sometimes me and the mods like to do something on purpose, where I'll just like respond to a comment and I just wait. And if you notice, you'll see a lot of gray notifications in the chat. Ding, 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 ding. Slowly but surely popping off. Okay? You're being baited. You're being counter baited. We're eliminating people who are trolling in the chat. You are the ones who are being baited in this moment. You understand? It's housekeeping. We're doing housekeeping. You are too stupid to recognize that you are writing stupid takes in the chat to get permanently banned. Sometimes I just like to say some shit and then wait to see all the people who are going to be like, dude, you seem offended by this. Because I know that guy. In any other circumstance, when I'm talking about something super serious, is going to come in and try to do the same shit and derail the conversation. Right now, we're not having a super serious conversation, which is a great opportunity to weed them out. Okay?
Will work better. And I think if all the people in an enterprise, just to drive the point home, democratically decided, they would never give 2 or 3 individuals $100 million while everybody else can't send their kid to college. I mean, they're not going to do that.
This kind of got derailed. I mean, I think like the point was not adequately made. Damn us on this Fed behavior, bro. Sorry. Sometimes you got to do that. I say you're giving the game away, but motherfuckers are so stupid they'll say it anyway. Oh, 100%. It doesn't stop people. It's like oftentimes it's deranged behavior. So those people are not behaving in like a logical way. They're doing it because like they can't stop themselves. Why we ban them. All right, we're going to move on from this to how Fox News conquered America.
Fox News viewers believe that climate change is not caused by humans.
The campaign against global warming seems to have gone bust.
Do you think Lex has stands that ask, why are you platforming socialists? No, of course not. Of course not. Because right-wing and right-wing adjacent communities don't fucking complain about dumb shit like that. They love it. They love like, oh man, our ideas are getting out there. That's great. You were able to put our ideas in front of a larger audience. And I personally love that shit, is how they think.